from body to ego to self expression. Now, you might think that's an interesting topic if you've just joined us for the first time. I'm Kathleen Wiley. I'm a Jungian psychoanalyst, and I'm here with Deborah Henson-Conant, a mentor, a coach, a composer, or artist, and we both play the harp. So, almost every week, we want to come together to have a conversation about the intersection of human nature, i.e., what we know from psychology, and music, and to see how they come together and inform one another. So, today we're going to be exploring body to ego to self expression. And if you want to join in with us, hopefully the platform you're watching on, if you're watching live, allows you for put in comments and then we'll be able to see them. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's going to work. For a couple of weeks, we were off Facebook because I got hacked,
Yeah.
but now we're back on. And this is a subject that we come back to over and over again, that we find ourselves coming back to over and over again because it's such a fundamental part of both of our work. And we often come to it by thinking about a container for creative expression. And as we were speaking today, you had mentioned the word ego, and then as you were speaking, I was thinking, oh, your work is these embodiment practices, and I was like, oh, right, because the body is a container, and it's a container for self-expression.
Yes.
It can both inhibit us, and it can also help us to express ourselves. And one of the things that I've been noticing lately, as I've been struggling with certain processes, and as I've been teaching processes, creative processes to all the people in Hip Harp Academy, is that I keep hearing the same thing come up over and over again. When I teach a simple creative structure that lets people be expressive, they always say the same thing, like, wow, it's so simple. I don't have to think.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what they mean is I don't have to figure out. They're clearly thinking, and they're performing, and they're playing, and they're enjoying what they're doing, and they're thinking, I'm okay, let's include my body, let's create expressivity, things like that. But I'll just give you a quick example. I was showing, it was something that eventually became quite complex, including modulation and creating a structure that people could use as a holiday greeting card, a video holiday greeting card. But it started with just putting the harp in the key of C and just getting really comfortable doing this thing, which is the thing that, harps can do so easily. And that often people who don't play the harp can just come up and do it. But harpists then get really self-conscious. But it's really just sounding the strings, but then giving structure to it by putting what's called the dominant chord in the bass, and then having a structure that could create a song, and just playing that on the bottom, and the bottom gives structure. So I just have these simple notes that impose a sense of structure on something that's completely unstructured. So people were able to use both hands, integrate them to actually be thinking about the expression of their right hand, which can be difficult if you're that would be difficult. And this is the same thing in terms of being able to communicate with somebody through music. And it's so simple, and it allows for the experience of self-expression. And once you can have that experience of like, whoa, oh, it can be easy, it can feel good, but it takes that integration. And it always makes me think, like of the body, when we're little kids, we're just, but that's how we do it until the mind starts incorporating, or I don't, about this. What happened?
One of the, so I'm thinking several things, and it just so happens one of the things that I was just reading before we got together this morning was where Jung was talking about how our our natural state of psyche, the phenomena of who we are with all the life processes, is one of multiplicity and inner division. Yet that experience of the multiplicity and inner division is also opposed by an integrative unity whose power is greater than that of that instinctive multiplicity. So that there is something within our psyche that wants a unity, that wants to contain all of it into a beautiful harmony. And as you were doing the demonstration there, it occurred to me with the glissando, there's this multiplicity of strings sounding. And yet and then there are all these other strings on the harp that you can begin to play with the chords to give it some structure.
Mm-hmm.
And the two then come together into a unity to make a song, to make the music that's sounding. And how there's a pattern in that you went with those chords in the um with the pattern, that there
Mm-hmm.
was a movement. So there's something that becomes a predictable, reliable pattern, just
Right.
like our instinctive self is predictable and reliable. The instincts are inborn, they're natural tendencies to move in a certain direction, to do a certain thing. It's kind of like the software program that's been installed, we might say, or some people would say the hardware. It's how we operate. And yet there's also this other energy that's more chaotic and unformed, that can all be sounding at the same time. And I know this is so true for me in my life when it comes to my creative desires. And, it's like there are lots of things that can be sounding at one time. And so to begin to be able to um, relax into the unity. And I want to segue for a minute to the idea of ego, because Freud, who is the founder of the kind of the grandfather of the unconscious, so to speak, he said our ego begins with the body. And we forget this, that our sense of self, because ego is identical to our conscious sense of self, the I am we feel we are. Ego begins with our body, the sense of who we are in our body. And so the first sense that any of us have in our life as an infant child, toddler, and throughout life is directly tied in to our experience of our own body. And unfortunately, the socialization process can lead us to disconnect it from our body and be disembodied heads. A lot of people live that way.
And I'm thinking as you say that it also, we can start to have opinions about our bodies and others, which then will inhibit us as well. As you were talking, I was thinking about something. Um, when I taught this thing, I can show you where it went. That there was a very simple pattern that started, but once people got solid with that pattern, I added a second pattern that was like a break pattern, a separate,
Mm-hmm.
and that pattern had more complex elements to it, and it was till it eventually became quite a complex, something that if you had just jumped in and said, okay, I have to learn this, it would have been complex, but it just kept growing and growing and growing, so that, and kept coming back, and we kept repeating it. And so people, I think, were able to at least find some parts where they could allow self-expression because the structure was comprehensible enough that they could start to integrate with it physically. And so it started
Yeah.
making me think about, how did I learn music as a child? And so
Yeah.
so two things. I remember as a kid, well, I learned music by learning three chords, those three
Mm-hmm.
chords basically, and then playing them over and over and over and over and over and over and over again with my mother, with my aunt, with my, with whoever would play
Mm-hmm.
songs. I would just play them over and over and over, and without any creative expression. At first, I was just doing it.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in classical music or the classical mindset, you come in, you learn it, and you don't ever even play it until you have some facility of all these details.
Yeah.
And when I was a kid or a little older and I started seeing films and I started seeing African people playing, rhythms and dancing, and the rhythms just went on, and I would be like, I don't understand. Like, how come they're not being creative? Because at a certain point, I thought that being creative was creating stories with music, because that's what I did. That was being creative. And I didn't even understand what was happening to me as I played with people. And as I look back and I see what was happening in those moments, is the fundamental structures of music in your life was being passed from one person to another and engaged in those social experiences.
Right.
And nowadays, our social experiences with music are, how good are you? Did you do something great? How many hits did your thing get? Instead of that sense of we're doing something together, we can have more and more fun with it, the more and more, the less and less we have to think about what is the thing we're doing. Now we're constantly thinking about what we're doing.
Yeah, because and we're thinking in the sense of evaluating and judging and
Right.
comparing,
Right.
which is such a deadly track, because we all will get disembodied when we go into that mindset, because
But
you know,
why and how does that happen?
well, it happens because the minute we compare ourselves, we're looking outside
I
as the
see.
gold standard instead of inside with our essence and who we are as the gold standard of who my expression.
Mm.
Um, when you were
Mm.
talking, something that we've been talking all around, even before we got on camera, about when you're in the working with people in the academy and you give them the structures like you demonstrated, that something shifts and they begin to relax, and then they say they don't think. And what I jotted down was, it's like that kind of thinking makes us a disembodied head. Whereas if we begin to experience, we use our thinking to say, okay, I'm going to do 1-4-5, or I'm going to do 1-4-1, or 1-4-5-1, whatever, that we're using our thinking then to begin to give ourselves a structure that is like the path to walk. And that as we have that
Mm.
path to walk, then we begin to feel what it's like to walk the path. And so our thinking is there, but the thinking is no longer dominant and leading. The thinking recedes into the background because the thinking has helped us see the path. Now we are dropping into the feeling and the experiencing of the path.
Right. We're in discovery rather than in, like, how can I do this right?
Right, that's right. And
Mhm.
so if you're in discovery, if you're comparing or competing or
Mhm.
evaluating, you're not in discovery mode. That's a function of logic and reason that takes you out of the larger, really the larger goal of thinking, which is to make meaning of what one's experiencing.
Yeah,
And
or I would say to also be self-expressed, or to be
yeah,
creatively expressive within the thing that you're doing. And
yeah.
like, how not how to do it, but what does it open up? What is a pattern like 1-4-5? It's the simplest chord progression that it is. Well, it's a simple chord progression,
Right.
and yet it opens up once you play it over and over again. Or
Hmm.
I meant 1-4-5-1, and you can just go. I mean, and then you can put it into another 1-4-5-1. I mean, once you have this pattern, it's. I've often thought, if you learn one thing, just one thing about music, and then you start exploring it, you will uncover everything else if you actually go on the exploration. If you try to follow the exact path that somebody else did and do it correctly, you're not going to really find anything.
And the same is true about knowing oneself. If we
Tell me,
try to
tell me.
follow, if we try to follow someone else's path, then we're not tuning in to my sense of self and what's happening in my body. So we have to be able to be with ourselves, to be present, to know what's happening inside of us if we're going to follow our own path.
Well, great. How? I mean, like,
Well, in some ways, it's the same thing that you're talking about with music. It's that we learn the basic structures of how psyche works. And then we begin to see how that's fleshed out in us, how we operate. It's kind of like by observation and experimentation, we discover our own operating system and kind of write our own manual.
okay, so
Because
what would be a 145? I'm thinking we should call it 145 of create. So what would be a one? So, but for
okay,
anybody that's
yeah.
not a musician, the scale has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 notes, and the 1 and the 4 and the 5 have a special relationship to each other. They're also the three major chords in the they have a similar structure. All right, and you can start playing around with them. You could do rhythms with them. What is a 1, 4, 5 that I could play around with my psyche?
The 145 would be the 1 would be your gut, the 4 would be your heart, and the 5 would be your head. And you go back always to the 1 because 1 is the home, 1 is the root, and that's the gut, the body.
Okay, so I've been lately discovering that my gut, that's where I hold myself together through fear. And
Mm.
I've started been exploring, this is a whole other subject, exploring bringing like this golden light into my spine, which somebody explained to me, you've rediscovered Kundalini yoga. Okay, whatever. So when you say gut, for me, that might be fear and love and
It's
okay,
all of it. It's not just
okay,
fear. There
all
are
right.
non-innate affects, according to the developmental psychologist. Fear is only one of the nine. The problem is that,
There's
yeah,
9. What are the other
there
8?
are nine. There's distress, there's joy, there's surprise, there's contempt, there's disgust, there's shame, there's fear, there's one
Wait a
more.
second. Where's the fun ones?
Well, the joy, the surprise,
How about, I mean, what
um,
about love? Is love in there? I mean, I guess it's
love is not that love was not identified as a innate affect. I think love is well, that's something else we could talk about.
yeah,
I mean,
I
we
know
could talk about it as
we have like 3 minutes. Tell me all about
yeah,
love.
yeah, but it's interesting you mentioned love because A Course in Miracles says that the opposite of fear is love.
Right.
And
And
so that love is
what about sorry.
love is a unitive state, whereas
Oh,
fear
I
would be a state of multiplicity. And that's how I would connect it to if you think about when you're caught in fear, how split up things are, and how you're caught in this sense of an enemy. Fear always has an enemy, whereas when there's unity, everybody's working together in the same direction. Love evokes unity. I think love and from a Jungian perspective would be tied to the archetype of eros, relatedness, that we want relatedness, we want connection.
oh, connection to not feel
Yeah,
alone.
yeah.
Okay, so you're giving, I know we need to end, and we promise that this is about body, ego, and self-expression.
Self-expression.
Okay, all right. So so in this exercise that you've just given me, to find some kind of a dance, a 1, 4, 5 little musical thing that I can play in myself between my gut, my
Heart
my heart,
in your
and my
head.
okay, all right, between my gut, my heart, and my head. So I can play around with them. I could even play with music, like I could have one chord represent one, and just play around
Gut.
with it.
Yeah.
And okay, so how does this illuminate for me my ego, and how would it lead to self-expression in 2 minutes?
Yeah. I think it's going to illuminate your ego because your ego, your sense of self begins with your body. So if you're checking in with what's happening in your gut, your heart, and your head, then you're getting a much bigger picture than if you're only following the gut, which is caught in fear, or the head, which is caught in control, or the heart, who just wants everything to be, so it all works together.
Okay.
So
I see.
that's how, yeah,
And if you're connecting that body to any kind of self-expression, whether it's a harp or whether it's a ukulele or whether it's a pen that you're dun 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 dun, or whether it's dancing or anything, as you repeat it, there's something about repetition that opens up creative expression.
yes, repetition and experimenting.
Mm.
If we tune into our gut and our heart and our head, and they start to work together, so that the head is listening to what the
Mm.
heart really wants and matters, and the
Mhm.
heart is tied in with what's coming up from the gut as the natural instinctive prompts to want connection. Let's just use that for example. The
Wow.
creative expression's going to be there.
Okay, so what I'm hearing about this little exercise is that I could take three chords and I could think about my gut and my heart and my head, and I could play with them, and I could have each listen
Yes.
to the other. I
Yes.
could go back and forth. And for anybody I'm in the key of C and I'm playing an A minor for my, what did I say? For my gut.
Your
Then I
gut.
F for my heart. And I said G because it has all kinds of different things. My head, kinds of things. And I can go back and forth and play with these things. Okay, all right. And as I do that, I will find ways. Self-expression will happen.
It will happen because, we think we have to go. Well, let me back up. Jung
Okay.
says
And
creativity
you
is an
have
instinct.
30 seconds.
Yeah, creativity is an instinct. So that's where I'll stop. Creativity is an instinct, according to Jung, and instincts arise from the body. So we don't have to make ourselves creative. We only have to drop into the creative flow of our own nature, both for how we live our life day to day and our creative expression with our art form or our instrument.
And that's so beautiful because when you said drop into the flow, and I realized when you have a pattern that you can play with, you can actually create the flow that way
That's
to
right.
drop into. Okay, I promise I will go on to a Facebook Live and play with this,
Yay.
and say what I'm doing. That will be an exciting thing for me to do. All right.
Yes, I love it. And I'm going to play with this with my harp too today.
Okay. All right. Beautiful. All right. Okay. Well, everybody, thank you so much for being part of this conversation. And we forgot to say that at the beginning. It's a conversation. We don't know what we're going to discover, but we do have this container of meeting and talking. And that opens up. The more we do it, the more it opens up new ideas and things to play with. So, Kathleen, thank you for being a playmate in this amazing garden that keeps expanding. And thank
Yes.
you, everybody, for listening with us today, and also the wonderful people who say things to us and who watch or don't say, or which is now, blah, blah, now I'm talking blah. Okay. Yeah, thank you for listening. Thank you for being part of this. Thank you for being part of the discovery. Kathleen, I look forward to probably not seeing you next week because it's American Thanksgiving.
Right.
Right. But
But
that means
2 weeks.
the week after. Okay, beautiful. All right. Thank you, everybody, and farewell until next time.